Hi, today I'm going to build a test dummy website, which I'm planning to use in further videos and further reviews of site performance troubleshooting and site availability troubleshooting. I'm not going to use any CMS. I did not register any domain for this. It will be just a simple one-pager site built on Scratch using the text editor. It's going to be hosted in Amazon S3 service. Because why not? Plus, I'm going to use Amazon services in further chapters just to get my hands dirty. Alright, so I'm going to create a very simple, basic HTML page, which will be the only page of my dummy website. It will contain some basic elements, which will allow me to test the performance of my site later on. Nothing fancy. As you see, I'm using Visual Studio Code as my text editor. So I'm going to put some elements as title of the page, some text, sample form that has just the text field and submit button. Upon submit, we call test function, which checks whatever value you enter into the text field and displays it in the message, just for fun. I have a sample image of my cat. It's 4 megabytes, which is important for my troubleshooting of site performance, and sample JavaScript. I found it online. It loads the cookie concerned banner on the page dynamically. So that's it for the content. I'm going to save this file. I'll give it a name, myhomepage.html. I saved it in my local folder. And I'm going to open it locally in my browser just to test how it looks like. Okay, there we go. So you see local path, form, click here, enter something, let's enter something, displays what I entered, the image of my cat, and the JavaScript, that's the custom code that creates this banner at the bottom of the page, and the way how this banner looks like depends on the geography of the page visitor. In my case, I just see the continue button, which I can press. Well, nothing meaningful, but again, there is some information and data on the page which I can play with later on. So I have the local copy of my site, which works fine on my machine. Now we're going to host it online, so everybody having a link would be able to open the same page and see the same elements of the page. As mentioned, I'm going to use Amazon S3. S3 stands for Simple Storage Service. However, the functionality allows to use the S3 buckets as a hosting platform for the static websites, which I'm going to use at the moment. So let's see, step by step. I'm logged into my AWS account. I'm going to go to S3 services and I'll create a new bucket. We'll specify bucket name as test bucket 3. Important note here that the bucket name must stay unique within the global namespace. It means if I try to put test123, I'll get an error stating that such name is already used. So there are rules and recommendations related to bucket naming. There are some exceptions which you must avoid. So there are some specific prefixes that must not be part of the name, and many other things that you can read in documentation. So going quickly further, I'm going to keep ownership of this bucket within my AWS account. If I need to have other account to own this bucket, I would set up access control lists. In this case, I am leaving ACLs disabled by default. this configuration to block public access, I'm going to untick, which would mean that I'm not blocking public access, which means my bucket should be publicly available to those with the link, right? Untick. Acknowledge that I'm exposing the bucket contents to the public. Bucket versioning, in this case, I'm not going to use any versions. Well, if you enable public bucket versioning, it means that you'll have mini version control system. You can always refer to versions of files that are placed in the bucket. I don't need that. Tags, good idea to use tags overall in the elements that you create in AWS. In this case, I am going to skip this. Not relevant for this exercise anyway. Encryption, keeping by default. Bucket keys, keeping by default. I'm not going to lock any objects within my bucket, and looks like these are the all options. Right, successfully created my bucket. Let's upload some content. So since I'm going to use my bucket as a hosting for my website, I'm going to upload the files that I created locally on my machine. There we go. I will upload the homepage HTML that I created previously. And I have a folder with few images, which I am also going to upload, all of them. Under permissions section, I see the banner that tells me that I have bucket owner enforced setting applied for the object ownership. This setting impacts how permissions to the individual objects are granted based on the permissions for the whole bucket. And I see the important note about bucket policies that I need to use to control access to the elements. Let's see on practice what that means. Other properties I'll leave by default. I don't need to change the type of my storage. And I'm uploading the files now. Perfect. So the upload has been a success. Let's see how my bucket looks like in Amazon S3. So there you go. I have my HTML file and I have my image folder with files. Now I have something called URI and URL. URI, it's the unique resource identifier. That's the internal name of my bucket, which can be used within the availability zones during replication and internal addressing. And I'm not going to use that. Going further, I'm going to use the URL, Unified Resource Locator. That's the global public address of the bucket and of the elements available to everyone. Let me copy this URL and let me test it in my browser. Interesting. I expected that it would work because I specified make my bucket publicly available. Why do I get access denied? The error is related to that information banner that I was paying attention a few seconds ago. It means that I'm missing some access permissions. I can add them separately in the permissions of my bucket. I need to specify bucket policy to make public access work well. So I'm going to edit the policy and I'm going to paste the sample one. I'll just change the ID of the bucket that I'm going to work with. That's my bucket and everything within it. Basically, this policy tells that everyone can read objects within this bucket, all folders. Some curious thing that I found, this version goes back to 2012. If you want to change it to 2024, let's say, the parser will give you an error message that it's an invalid version. Explanation is that this is the version of policy standard which was created and published back in 2012, and you can't change it. If you want, you can use the previous versions, and to learn more about that, there are links to the Amazon documentation. Alright, but for this exercise I created basic policy, which I'm going to save. Let me test access to my bucket now. Go back to incognito mode and reload the same address. Right. To note, this is the URL of the home page, so I can see it now, and if I give this URL to anyone, they will be able to open it through the internet. Right, a few more tweaks that I wanted to do. Since I'm calling this my dummy website, if I remove the page from the URL, I will not get anything here. I will not see the content. There are a few more tweaks that I can do in the bucket settings to make this bucket as a hosting of my website. In properties, I can enable the static website hosting feature. I'm going to update few settings. My page is called my homepage.html. This is what I'm going to put here. This will be the default page when I open the address of my dummy website. I don't need to specify any error HTML, so everything looks good. I save the changes. Now let me test again. I expect this address to work because I specified the home page as a default landing page. Doesn't work again. This is because at the moment I have the URL of the bucket. So this is the endpoint of the S3 bucket. However, when I set the static website hosting feature, I get another URL, which is the website endpoint. So let me test this. I will copy this URL and paste in another tab of my incognito mode and see what happens. Connection is not secure because I did not configure HTTPS protocol. It's just HTTP, so I will just continue to the site as is. My browser is not happy with that, but you see the site is loading, and that's actually why I used huge image and non-optimal, long-lasting, heavy JavaScript. Even visually, you see that it's loading quite slowly, which is perfect, and I'm going to use this in my future videos to troubleshoot and to see ways how to improve that. To note, for debugging purposes, I've got all I need. I have my website, which is available using some long unreadable URL, which gives me all the content, and I can play with this because I have access to the backend, to the source to the hosting where the resources are stored. Obviously, there is a way to create a nice looking domain, my super single pager website.com, and configure the DNS CNAME record that would be pointing to this long unreadable technical URL. That will work. I'm going to omit this step. I did not register a domain, and I'm not going to set up the CNAME. However, I would like to cover one more aspect of Amazon services. I'm going to put this dummy website behind the CDN network, the CloudFront service. Before I do that, just to illustrate how the concept will look like, if you type in mybeautifuldomain.com in the browser and configure the CNAME DNS record to point to the URL of the S3 bucket, it will work. The content of the bucket will be displayed in the browser. And another approach that I'm going to test is to create the CloudFront distribution in front of the bucket. So create the CNAME record of your domain to point to the URL of the CloudFront distribution, which will then route the request to S3 bucket. It will also work. I'm not going to create a name of mydomain.com, but I'm going to create the distribution. The URL of this will be a little bit shorter and nicer compared to the long URL of the S3 bucket. And further on, I'm going to use the CloudFront URL. Now let's configure this in AWS console. So in the console, I'm going to CloudFront service. I'm going to create new so-called distribution. I'm going to select my recently created S3 bucket. Since I configured this bucket to act as a static web hosting, I've got a warning that I should not be using the S3 bucket endpoint. Instead, I should be using S3 website endpoint. So yes, I will agree. You see that the format of the URL will change. Currently, it contains the bucket name .s3.region.amazon domain, and if I change it to the website endpoint, now it contains my S3 bucket name, S3 website and the region, and Amazon domain, so slightly different. Other settings I'm planning to keep as default. So far, I don't need any extra protection. I don't need any fancy caching configurations. So let me keep it by default and see what happens when I click create distribution. Looks like it worked. No errors, no warnings. This is the domain name of my distribution. Some standard default security settings. Web application firewall disabled. I don't need this for my test. Origin, making sure this is the bucket 3 that I created. Looks fine. I did not put any tags here, so I think I should be ready to test it. If I copy the distribution domain name and paste into my incognito mode in the browser, will I see? I will not see, just because this domain name has not been propagated in the DNS system, in the DNS servers. I will need to wait for a while in order to get this address working. Alright, DNS propagation is complete. Now if I paste the address of my CloudFront distribution, it loads my website. And by the way, I can use HTTPS protocol, which is good. You don't see any warnings about that. And let's see details of my connection. So it is CloudFront certificate. Great. I'm happy. So now I have a dummy website, which is accessible using several using several URLs, using several options. I can put the URL of the CloudFront CDN distribution, and I can get to my website, or I can specify the URL of the S3 website endpoint that will open the content of my bucket directly. Perfect. So I'd like to play with this site just for 1 second to build a bridge for further reviews. Using the browser tools, I can reload the site, and again I see how slowly it loads. I see which resources are being loaded here in the browser. You see my cat photo and the homepage and the custom JavaScript. If you check the response headers of the homepage, there you will clearly see that the page is served by Amazon S3 and a few other standard headers which always indicate that the resource is on Amazon services. The same way I can do in the terminal using curl command with flag -i. I'm putting exactly the same domain as in my browser and hit enter, and I can see the Amazon headers in the response. So I've got my dummy website up and running on Amazon S3 service, built with text editor, did not bother about style or design, but I've got something that I can work with further. This is a bridge to the next video, to the next exercise, where I'm going to troubleshoot the site performance. It was clearly seen without even fancy tools that the content of that dummy site is loading very slowly. It's not the performance of Amazon servers, it's not speed of my network connection, it's just deliberately selected huge resources that comprise the web page, which I'm going to troubleshoot later on. That's it for today. Thank you and speak later.